In this video, we're going to look at additive and multiplicative comparisons using the tree problem. Mike plants 2 trees in his backyard in 2003 and measures their height. 3 years later, he measures the trees again and records their new heights. The information on the year and the height of the trees is given below. So in 2003, tree A is 2 meters tall and tree B is 3 meters tall. In 2006, tree A is 5 meters tall and tree B is 6 meters tall. So our first question is, Mike and his family are debating which tree grew more. Which tree do you think grew more and why? So I'd like you to take a minute to answer this question on your own. I'm not going to fill anything in. And it's not a trick question, okay? I just want you, there's different ways to reason about how the trees might have grown more compared to each other. So I want you to write down what you think. So go ahead and pause, write your answer, and then continue on to the next slide. So question 2, Mike's son John says that neither tree grew more, so let's highlight that, than the other because both trees grew exactly 3 meters. If this said 1 meter, please correct it. How did John determine this mathematically? Write the computations he might have made below. So let's see what he might have done. So let's look at tree A. In 2003, tree A was 2 meters tall. And in 2006, tree A is 5 meters tall. So we said the trees each grew exactly 3 meters. Well, we can find that by subtracting 2 from 5 to get 3 meters. And I also want to show you another way to think of it. We could say it was 2 meters, it grew by some amount, so we add on whatever amount it grew to get 5 meters. And the amount it grew is the amount we add on. And when we subtracted 5 minus 2, we found that amount, 3 meters. Okay? So tree A grew 3 meters by subtracting 5 minus 2. Now for tree B, in 2003, it was 3 meters. And in 2006, tree B was 6 meters. Now, if it grew exactly 3 meters, we could find that by subtracting the 2006 value minus the 2003 value, which gives us 3 meters. Or we can think it started at 3 meters. How much did it grow? How much would you add on to get to the 2006 value of 6 meters? And the result again is 3 meters. Okay? So this may be how you thought about it, which is a completely reasonable way to think about it. They both grew 3 meters. Okay? Now we're asked, is John making an additive or a multiplicative comparison? Explain your reasoning. Well, in your packet, it distinguishes between these two types of comparison. An additive comparison is found via subtraction of the two quantities being compared. And that may seem, quantities being compared, that may seem a little bit weird, because why are we calling it an additive comparison if we're subtracting? Okay? And you can refer to this idea here. Well, we want to know what we would add on to some original amount to get a future amount. But to actually find that, we use the operation of subtraction. Okay? A multiplicative comparison is found via division. And again, of the two quantities being compared. So we would divide the new amount by the original amount, which we'll see an example of later. But in this case, notice the comparison is additive. We wanted to find what do I add to the old amount to get the new amount. So our comparison is additive. Since we subtracted the two quantities being compared. Now let's look at the next part. Mike's daughter Danielle says that tree A grew more than tree B. She says that even though they both grew 3 meters, and again fix that if it says 1, since tree A was shorter than tree B in 2003, tree A grew more relative to its original height. Okay. So let's take a look at what her thinking is saying. So we're going to write a ratio that compares tree A's height in 2006 to tree A's height in 2003. So notice we're going to put the future, well, I know 2006 isn't in the future, but the later year amount first. So it's later height, tree's height in 2006, which is 5 meters. And a ratio means we write one value divided by another as a fraction over 2 meters. And we can simplify by thinking of this as 5 to 2. Okay? And if we simplify this fraction, it's 2.5, or I'm just going to write that as 2.5. Okay? So that means if we compare them multiplicatively, in 2006, tree A's height is 2.5 times as large as tree A's height in 2003. So looking at this on the image, here's tree A. Now before when we compared additively, we wanted to see, well, how much do we add on to get from here to here? And that was 3. Okay. But now to compare multiplicatively, we're thinking, how many of these 2 meters, how many copies, I'll draw this in blue, of 2 meters are in the future values? So there's 1 2 meters, 2 2 meters is 5 meters, and then there's 1 more meter, which is half of this original height. So this is the 1, 1 and a half. So it's 2.5 times as large in 2006 as it was in 2003. Let's do the same type of comparison for tree B. So in 2006, tree B is 6 meters. In 2003, tree B was 3 meters. So we have 6 over 3, or 6 divided by 3 is 2. Okay? So again, comparing them additively, we said how much do we add on to 3 to get 6? And we added on another 3, the same as we did here. Comparing them multiplicatively, let's just draw a little diagram. We started at 3 meters when we had 6 meters in 2006. That is 2 copies of 3 meters. So the 2006 tree height is 2 times as large, 2 copies of 3 of the 2003 height. So in 2006, tree B's height is 2 times as large as tree B's height in 2003. So use your answers from parts A to D to determine which tree grew more using a multiplicative comparison. Okay? So since we divided here, that's why we found a multiplicative comparison. And remember, the multiplicative part comes into play. We divided by 6 meters by 3 meters, but we could say, well, in 2003, it was 3. How many times, or what would we multiply that by? How many copies will get us to 6? Well, we'd multiply 3 by 2 to get 6. But instead of solving this multiplicative equation, we say, well, 6 divided by 3 is what this number will be, which is 2. Okay? So using a multiplicative comparison, tree A grew more since 2.5 is larger than 2. Okay? So this is a multiplicative comparison, and now we've seen how we can compare things in two different ways. And it's important that we know how to compare them in both ways, even though this section is going to mostly focus on multiplicative comparisons. Okay? So remember, the idea going through this is that we're comparing to some relative to some original amount. Okay, so we're comparing 5 relative to 2. So just a quick example, just to reinforce this idea, is say a college student wins $100, which may be you. Let's have you win the $100, and maybe a heart surgeon wins $100. Now, if we compare them additively, they both won the same amount of money. But who do you think is probably more excited about winning the $100? I know when I was a college student, $100 would seem like a lot of money, but to a heart surgeon, they work very hard to get a great job. They make a lot of money. They probably spend $100 on their lunch. Who knows? Okay, so that's the part where the relative comparison is really coming in useful, because we want to compare it to some amount to make sense of an individual context.